She was picked to sing as a joke just because of her pale cotton dress, her plain canvas bag, and how ordinary she looked in a room full of silk gowns and glittering diamonds. "Ella, was it? Sing us a bit of opera for fun," someone said loudly, triggering laughter that rolled across the room. Ella simply smiled, walked to the front, said nothing in her defense. No one in that room knew. They were about to hear the voice that once made the Berlin State Opera rise in a 3-minute standing ovation. The private charity gala took place in the grand estate of Mrs. Lawson, a famed socialite known for hosting lavish events that combined opulence and a shallow kind of philanthropic flair. It was a balmy evening in New York, just after the last pinkish rays of sunset had faded into a deep bruise along the horizon. Guests began arriving in sleek cars that glided up the circular driveway, each stepping out in glimmering ensembles that caught the porch lights. Women in evening gowns that cost small fortunes, men in tuxedos with subtle variations of black, all converged upon the open foyer where uniformed staff took coats and guided them to the main ballroom. The floral arrangements were meticulously displayed in every corner, tall glass vases filled with orchids or lilies, the air infused with the faint sweetness of high-end perfume. A hush of refined voices drifted under the chandelier glow. It was exactly the kind of environment in which Ella felt invisible. Her simple cotton dress, a faint, dusty rose hue, seemed to vanish among the shimmering satins. She arrived on the arm of Dan Rutherford, an unassuming IT consultant who knew Mrs. Lawson through some tangential business arrangement. Dan, too, wore a slightly ill-fitting suit that suggested he rarely indulged in formal attire. They stepped into the foyer, instantly aware they were out of place. Ella clutched her canvas bag, inside of which she carried everyday essentials, a battered notebook where she scribbled stray thoughts or melodic lines, a worn wallet, keys, and an old phone. The doorman paused to stare, but said nothing, evidently deciding they must have had some reason for being on the guest list. The moment they entered the main ballroom, the distinction between them and the rest of the guests sharpened. At least 100 people mingled, sipping champagne from tall flutes, nibbling on canapes arranged on silver trays. Mrs. Lawson herself, draped in a floor-length black gown shimmering with tiny crystals, circled from group to group, radiating that brittle warmth of someone who thrived on surface-level compliments. Soft classical music wafted from a small ensemble near the stage where a grand piano lay idle, presumably waiting for the evening's entertainment. In subdued corners, people whispered deals or boasted of their summer estates in Italy. Ella took in the scene, her posture tentative. She had once navigated high society, though no one here suspected it. The hush of condescension brushed past her ears, like a mild wind, unspoken but biting. She saw how some guests in the throng turned to eye her wrinkled dress with confusion, if not outright scorn. Her mother used to say, "Let them stare, there's more to you than they'll ever see." And so Ella forced a small, polite smile, letting Dan guide her to a less crowded area, near a side table stacked with hors d'oeuvres. She felt her heart tighten, recalling the swirl of paparazzi she once escaped in her previous life. She had wanted anonymity, had chosen it. Now, ironically, she felt exposed even in anonymity because this crowd found her unworthy of notice, except as a target for subtle ridicule. They took seats at what Mrs. Lawson referred to as the overflow table, a round table near the back, slightly off to the side from the main stage. The others at the table were similarly out-of-place folks. Some distant relatives of donors, a couple of junior-level employees from a sponsor's firm, all wearing the look of cautious politeness that suggested they knew they were accessories to the real event. Dan introduced Ella to them in a quiet voice, receiving half smiles and nods in return. A moment later, Mrs. Lawson herself drifted by, zeroing in on Ella. The hostess's eyes traveled from Ella's plain flats up to her simple cotton dress, and a faint lift of her eyebrows signaled her disapproval. With a carefully modulated laugh, Mrs. Lawson purred. "So nice you could join us. That dress is refreshing. Reminds me of a simpler time." Ella murmured a thank you, but the hostess's eyes sparkled with something more akin to contempt, as though she believed she'd discovered a flaw in the night's presentation. She turned away, calling out to someone more important, with an immediate shift in her tone. Ella exhaled, exchanging a wry glance with Dan. She'd survived more humiliating encounters in her past, but this still pricked her pride. She reminded herself that she'd come only to support the charity, not to impress anyone. After an hour of mingling and toasting, the main portion of the gala began. The lights dimmed, focusing on a small stage at the front where a microphone stood. A hush fell, and Mrs. Lawson took the stage in a swirl of black sequins, greeting everyone with an elaborate monologue about the importance of art, how tonight's contributions would benefit youth music education programs. Applause followed. Then a flamboyant man in a violet suit stepped up, introducing himself as Armand Leclerc, a theatrical agent. He proclaimed that, as part of the evening's entertainment, he would challenge the guests to a friendly vocal competition. The winner, chosen by audience acclamation, would receive 2 tickets to the upcoming Vienna Philharmonic's special performance. A cheer rose, some guests clapping in anticipation. Ella sipped her water, unimpressed. She knew how these impromptu competitions often masked a chance for certain well-connected amateurs to show off. Her mind drifted, recalling the nights she performed in gilded opera houses, once revered for her voice. The memory made her chest ache. She set her water glass down, determined not to let nostalgia unravel her. The first volunteer was a middle-aged man with salt and pepper hair who sang a passable baritone excerpt from a well-known Italian aria. He did so with stiff posture, garnering polite applause. Next, a petite woman in an emerald gown took the stage, delivering a showy musical theater piece, her vibrato wavering but her confidence unwavering. The crowd cheered enthusiastically, more for the spectacle than the skill. Armand, playing the role of flamboyant MC, teased the next performer, scanning the crowd for a new victim. Ella had a sinking feeling as his gaze swept the tables, seeking fresh fodder for the game. She lowered her eyes, but it was too late. He spotted her cotton dress, recognized the potential comedic payoff. He pointed in her direction, raising his voice. "Ella was it. Over there. Why don't you join us next for a bit of opera? Let's see your spirit." Applause and laughter trickled across the rows. People turned to stare, some smirking, others whispering. The hush carried that undercurrent of mockery. A wave of warmth flooded Ella's cheeks. She felt Dan tense beside her, about to protest. But she gently pressed a hand to his arm, signaling him not to intervene. She recalled that old vow, never let scorn define her. She must face them, even if it meant swallowing her comfort. She stood, sliding her bag carefully off her shoulder, leaving it by her seat. The hush grew thicker as she walked to the stage, that hush, laced with the crowd's expectancy of comedic disaster. The overhead lights cast an unflattering glow on her, making the wrinkles in her dress more visible. People whispered, "Look at that cotton. Is she serious? Oh dear, this is going to be painful." Armand greeted her with a wide grin, letting the mic pick up his patronizing tone. "So, Ella, do you have any experience singing opera, or is this just for fun? Because we love a bold spirit." The crowd chuckled. She offered a small, polite smile, uttering no excuses. Ms. Terry, one of the gala's self-appointed art aficionados, waved from the second row. "Darling, if you want to prove your skill, let's hear something challenging, maybe from the magic flute." "Do you know Queen of the Night's aria? That's quite demanding, but we all love a good spectacle." Laughter resumed, a few calling out jokes about high notes. Ella inhaled slowly. That aria der Holerach was notoriously difficult, requiring mastery of coloratura leaps up to high Fs. She recognized the test they wanted to see her fail. She considered refusing, but a deeper part of her recognized an opportunity. She turned to the accompanist standing near a piano, asking softly if he had the sheet music. He blinked in surprise, rummaged through a pile, then nodded. The crowd rustled, exchanging smirks. Some whispered, "She'll never get halfway. I'll bet my ring." She stepped to the piano, adjusting the bench by the slightest fraction. That act alone made the accompanist's eyebrows rise. Only a trained musician would do that so precisely. Ella placed a hand lightly on the piano's edge, the hush intensifying, and nodded to the pianist. The introduction began those intense, somewhat jagged chords. She felt her pulse quicken, recalling each note from memory. Then she parted her lips and let the aria begin. From the first phrase, the crowd realized something was off. Instead of a hesitant or squeaky sound, her voice poured out bright, crystalline, shaped by a practiced technique that soared through each measure. 10 seconds in, the laughter died mid-breath. The hush turned reverential. Her high staccatos danced with clarity. Her coloratura runs glided with an unforced fluidity. Each note was pinned in the air like a shimmering jewel. Her posture remained controlled, face serene. The difficulty of the piece, the leaps, the fast tempo, the extreme upper range would normally strain even seasoned sopranos. But she executed it with disarming ease. The melodic fury of Der Hölle Rach came forth unstoppable. Gasps escaped some watchers. Mrs. Lawson, hostess of the evening, dropped her champagne flute, the glass shattering at her feet. Ms. Terry, who'd challenged Ella to pick this aria, sank back in her seat, wide-eyed, mascara-laden tears appearing at the corners. A man near the back whispered, "This can't be real," in pure disbelief. As Ella approached the final coloratura runs, the entire room seemed to hold its breath. She nailed each note, even those dreaded high Fs, with unwavering precision. The pianist, though skilled, barely kept up. Then the aria ended in a flourish of staccato brilliance, and she let the final note linger, letting the quiet reign for a heartbeat before dropping her voice back to silence. The applause roared, a veritable thunderclap of hands, some people leaping to their feet. The hush of mockery was replaced by stunned exultation. People stared as though witnessing a ghost, an impossible phantom of talent. Ella bowed her head slightly in acknowledgement, then stepped away from the spotlight. Ms. Terry had a hand pressed to her chest, eyes wet with shock. Armand Leclerc, the flamboyant agent, stammered, "That was the most... Oh my God." The hush turned into frenzied whispers, as guests realized they'd just heard a world-class performance from someone they had ridiculed moments ago. Some murmured that it was the best queen of the night they'd heard outside a professional stage. Others tried to recall if they'd seen her in any official productions. That's when a voice from the edge of the crowd declared, "Wait a minute." That was Ella Williams. She won top prize at Berlin's opera competition last year. The speaker was an older arts columnist, half rising from his seat, squinting to confirm. "Yes, I'd recognize that timbre anywhere. Why is she here incognito?" A swirl of excitement erupted, people clamoring with questions. Mrs. Lawson, desperate to save face, approached, stuttering, "Oh dear, we had no idea. If only we'd known, we would have offered you a prime spot on the program. My apologies for the silly introduction." But an older violinist standing nearby cut in. "You scorned her. You all did. And she sang anyway." The hush returned thick with contrition. The throng parted to let Ella pass. She felt no need to linger, aware that they suddenly wanted to claim her as a star. She found Dan by the corner, whose face glowed with wonder. She gave him a small, private smile of relief. Offers rained down on her in that single moment, various impresarios wanting to sign her for tours, a wealthy patron offering to finance a personal album, a famed conductor pleading for her to join his upcoming production. They acted as though she was a coveted diamond discovered in a dusty corner. Ella gently thanked them, but her posture and gaze signaled she wasn't interested. The crowd tried to press business cards into her hand, yet she refused them with a polite calm, repeating that she wasn't returning to the professional circuit. Confusion rippled among those who believed no one would squander such opportunity. But Ella had her reasons, memories of heartbreak tied to her mother's death and how stardom once overshadowed her personal life. She'd vowed never again to let the stage define her. Ms. Terry, tears streaking her mascara, tried to approach with shaky apologies, stammering that she never meant to insult Ella. Ella gave a quiet nod, not unkind, but clearly uninterested in discussing it. The hush of the crowd thickened, each guest unsure how to proceed. The entire dynamic had flipped. They who had mocked her now groveled for her attention, while she, wearing the same cotton dress and scuffed flats, stood poised, unshaken by their sudden admiration. Armand Leclerc, still holding the microphone, attempted to salvage the evening's structure. He proclaimed Ella the unanimous winner of the impromptu sing-off. Applause thundered anew. But when he tried to present her with the 2 tickets to the Vienna Philharmonic, she simply stepped forward, gently refused them, explaining in a calm tone that she had no interest in collecting a prize for a performance she never intended to do. The hush of astonishment followed. People realized she truly was turning her back on the accolades. Some stared at her in disbelief, others in grudging respect. Mrs. Lawson plastered on a brittle smile, urging her to reconsider. "We can arrange a special feature, a spotlight for your talents, dear." But Ella only shook her head. "No need," she said quietly. Then, hooking her arm through Dan's, she walked toward the side door that opened into the estate's veranda, leaving behind a baffled crowd. The hush parted around her footsteps, and she slipped away into the warm night air. Freed from the intense stares, she breathed easier. Dan followed, wide-eyed, brimming with questions. She told him quietly that she'd left behind the stage for reasons too complex to articulate right then, and that she intended to remain in her simpler existence. The next morning, local gossip columns exploded with the story "Mysterious Opera Diva in Cotton Dress Steals the Night." Some labeled her the opera ghost, referencing that no one recognized her at first. Others rehashed rumors about her abrupt disappearance from Berlin's opera scene. People who read about it devoured each detail, from how the hostess tried to humiliate her to the hush that followed her first notes. Photos showed the moment Ms. Lawson dropped her champagne, the snapshot of Ms. Terry leaning forward with parted lips. The coverage painted Ella as both heroine and enigma. But as the media clamored for interviews, they found no trace. Ella was nowhere to be found in the typical circles. She'd gone home to her modest apartment, spent the next day helping a friend move old furniture, and politely declined each reporter's phone calls. That was her life: quiet tasks, gentle routines. Over the next weeks, a swirl of new invitations flooded her mailbox, from philanthropic dinners to exclusive recitals. Dan teased that she could basically waltz onto any opera stage if she desired. She politely refused, each one returning the RSVPs with a simple "thank you for thinking of me, but I must decline." Some assumed it was a negotiation tactic, but her sincerity eventually dawned on them. The stories persisted for a while, enthralling local arts pages. People hypothesized why she refused fame, perhaps stage fright or heartbreak, or a vow she'd made to a dying mother. The truth was simpler and more personal. She had given her best to that world, once lost something precious in the process, and decided never again. She still sang, but only on her terms. She found solace in the memory of her mother's final words about how a voice is a gift, but you must choose who hears it. She had chosen that night to sing only because they tried to humiliate her. Now that she'd shown them, she saw no reason to remain in their midst. The aftershock among the gala attendees was severe. Mrs. Lawson faced ridicule for orchestrating an event that ended with her own embarrassment. Some guests who had snickered at Ella's appearance were left red-faced, receiving snark from acquaintances. The hostess tried to salvage her reputation by publicly praising Ella's unique humility, as if she had always championed Ella. But the public saw through the charade, mocking Mrs. Lawson for her hypocrisy. Meanwhile, Ms. Terry, the woman who demanded the Queen of the Night aria, wrote a social media post, still trying to keep it non-digital in the story environment. But let's say she wrote a letter to a local arts letter or something, praising Ella's transcendent vocal mastery, but it read more like an apology in disguised form. The older violinist who had spoken up at the gala repeated his condemnation. They tried to tear her down for a laugh, but she soared above them. At smaller gatherings, the talk was the same. Never judge a performer by their outfit. The moral lessons spilled into other events, perhaps slightly adjusting the city's snobbish culture. Ella, meanwhile, stayed devoted to her everyday life. She continued tutoring a few music students from her old circle, not caring if they knew her Berlin success. She found personal fulfillment in watching a shy teenager master a basic aria, seeing the glow in their eyes at discovering new potential. Word of mouth made her a sought-after private teacher, but she kept her circle small, carefully selecting those who seemed dedicated for the right reasons. She realized how many young aspirants get devoured by the thirst for fame, the same machine that once tried to brand her as a product. She wanted no part in that. She also recognized that her father's inheritance, a comfortable sum, allowed her to live modestly without chasing money. She never flaunted it, never moved from her modest apartment. She believed comfort was best found in the intangible joys of singing and teaching. Occasionally, she recalled the hush in that gala hall, how the crowd's laughter dissolved into stunned reverence, and she felt a pang of sadness, because it reminded her how quickly the world could flip from ridicule to worship. She had no taste for either extreme. One day, a letter arrived from an old friend in Berlin, Jonas the conductor, who had accompanied her biggest triumph. He wrote that the Berlin Opera was staging a new production and invited her to rejoin them. He'd heard rumors of her re-emergence at the gala, describing how the city buzzed with Ella sightings. Jonas insisted her place was still on the grand stage if she wanted it. She read his letter by the soft glow of a single lamp in her living room, feeling a swirl of conflicting emotions. She imagined the grandeur of that famed stage, the hush of thousands of spectators. She recalled how the applause once buoyed her after her mother's passing, yet also how each performance dredged up painful memories. In the end, she penned a short reply, thanking him for the invitation, but declining explaining in vague terms that she'd found a new path. She sealed the envelope, feeling tears prick her eyes, and mailed it the next day. Meanwhile, Dan's circle of acquaintances changed their tune about Ella. The same people who dismissed them as a forgettable couple at the overflow table now tried to invite them for dinners, hoping to hear Ella sing again. She politely evaded these invites, focusing on the real relationships in her life, like an old neighbor who needed help with grocery shopping, or a mentor from her father's generation. She recognized how ephemeral social acceptance could be. While Dan sometimes expressed frustration that they were missing out on potential alliances or perks, Ella gently reminded him that she'd never want connections built on shallow flattery. She'd learned that living simply might cost her some worldly advantages, but it also shielded her from the moral compromises she so dreaded. Another night, a budding journalist cornered her after one of her private teaching sessions at a local church's rec room, seeking an exclusive interview about the woman who stunned the gala. She refused to engage politely, saying she had nothing to add beyond the music. The journalist tried to push her, claiming the public wanted her story, why she left Berlin, how she felt about that humiliating setup, how she overcame it. She only repeated that the night spoke for itself, that she had no interest in fueling further speculation. The journalist eventually left, muttering about wasted opportunities. Ella let out a breath, feeling a pang of regret for the harshness, but she reminded herself the public's hunger for sensational detail often overshadowed the truth. Her father used to say, "Your story is yours to tell or not." She clung to that principle. The students she mentored flourished. She set up modest recitals for them in community centers, encouraging them to sing with open hearts, free from the shackles of elitism. Word of these recitals spread among local families who had children aspiring to musical careers. Some wealthy patrons tried to wedge their way in, hoping to transform these recitals into showcases for themselves, but Ella gently blocked them, ensuring the events remained about the students. She believed if even a fraction of them learned from her that singing was about expression, not vanity, the next generation might be spared the cruelty she had endured. She found quiet joy in watching shy kids bloom and hearing a once timid voice ring out with surprising confidence. She also found that her own memories of stardom grew less painful, replaced by gratitude for the simpler joys of guiding others. Over time, the high society gossip about her receded. Another scandal or two overshadowed her story. The city's short attention span moved on, yet a core group of music lovers still whispered about the angelic soprano in the cotton dress, speculating if she might appear at some underground open mic or a friend's wedding ceremony. Occasionally, rumors popped up. Someone claimed they saw her at a small jazz bar or heard her hum a lullaby at a corner cafe. Each rumor was half true, half exaggeration. She did occasionally wander into small jam sessions, but rarely performed. She'd become an urban legend, the brilliant voice that refused applause. Some found it romantic, others deemed it a waste. Ella herself, though, lived free of the burdens of the stage. She cultivated a small garden in her apartment's window boxes, grew herbs, cooked simple meals with Dan, and once a month she hosted a small dinner for her students and close friends. That normalcy grounded her. Then came the day Ms. Lawson, the gala hostess, wrote a heartfelt letter of apology referencing the humiliation at her event. She invited Ella to another upcoming function, promising to highlight her as the main attraction. She wrote about how the fiasco had taught her humility, how she regretted any slight, and that she wanted to do penance by championing young artists. The letter reeked of public relations spin, but a kernel of sincerity might have been there. Ella read it multiple times, recalling the glint in Ms. Lawson's eyes when she belittled her cotton dress. She decided not to reply. Silence was an answer in itself. She refused to become a trophy at Ms. Lawson's next social spectacle. The older she got, the more Ella found contentment in a life far from the bright lights she once commanded. She took on a small administrative role at the local art school, ironically matching the sort of job she'd originally held at the courthouse, but this time in a supportive environment. She juggled tasks like scheduling recitals, organizing practice rooms, emailing parents about upcoming concerts. Students occasionally recognized her from fuzzy YouTube videos of Berlin performances, grainy recordings that some fan had posted years ago. They'd approach her trembling with excitement, but she'd hush them sweetly, reminding them that any greatness she had was also within their reach, that they mustn't see her as an unapproachable star. She wanted them to be braver than she'd been unafraid of the stage's burdens. The staff at the art school came to love her calm presence, the way she never boasted the gentle corrections she offered to young singers. They knew a bit about her past, but respected her privacy. Occasionally, a local TV station or newspaper tried to do a "Where is she now?" piece. She dodged their requests, not out of bitterness, but because she genuinely believed the truest gift of her voice was something ephemeral she shared in small corners. Some critics argued this was selfish, denying the broader world her talent. She accepted that scorn, trusting her instincts. She remembered how her mother had once said that singing was the language of the soul, and the soul should never be bartered for applause. She found more meaning in seeing a shy teen tackle a difficult aria with new confidence than in performing for an audience of thousands. The frenzy around her name slowly died once again. She had quiet dinners with Dan, who remained her steadfast partner, never pressuring her to seize big opportunities. Their bond was gentle, built on shared values, supportive jokes about how the city had tried to eat them alive. They dreamed of maybe moving to a smaller town in a few years, opening a modest music center. Time would tell. A final echo of that gala night arrived one spring morning in the form of a letter from a philanthropic foundation that had once worked with Mrs. Lawson. They offered to sponsor a new music academy if Ella agreed to be its face. Her presence alone would draw donors. She read the letter's flowery language about how only your luminous talent can unify the donors. She smiled grimly, folded the letter, and placed it in a drawer. She recognized that even after her refusal, people still wanted to harness her stardom. That was precisely the machine she'd escaped. She replied that while she appreciated their interest, she wouldn't be the symbolic figure they sought. They wrote back, half pleading. She didn't respond further, letting them interpret her silence as an answer. She had no appetite for an institution built on illusions. In her personal life, she experienced small joys and losses. A friend from the Berlin days visited, hoping to coax her into a comeback on a famous stage. She politely turned them down. Another friend from the local scene asked if she'd cameo in a small fundraiser concert. That she accepted, but only if it was an unadvertised cameo. On that evening, in a tiny black box theater, she sang a simple lullaby arrangement, leaving the crowd breathless. She slipped out the side exit before any fuss, feeling the hush of gratitude that accompanied her. Word of mouth traveled, and each new rumor about the cotton-dressed soprano who vanished flickered briefly across the city. She carried on teaching, living simply, and storing up quiet joys. She thought about how one moment of humility overcame a roomful of arrogance at that gala, how a single performance could unravel their judgments. She considered it proof that authenticity was unstoppable, that a voice from the heart disarmed scorn better than any rant or argument. Some weeks later, she bumped into Ms. Terry by happenstance at a local grocery store. The arts patron looked uneasy, clearly recognizing Ella. She offered an awkward greeting, explaining she was picking up some items for a friend's dinner party. Ella nodded, not offering more. Ms. Terry then blurted a jumbled apology about that night, how cruel they'd been. She said she'd learned from the fiasco, had grown more open-minded. Ella listened calmly, seeing genuine remorse in the woman's eyes. "I'm sorry for underestimating you," Ms. Terry concluded, voice trembling. "We had no right." Ella accepted the apology with a gentle, "Thank you. We all do things we regret." She left the store with a small sense of closure, reflecting that even those who mocked her might find redemption in reflection. She hoped so for the sake of the city's cultural soul. Another random turn of events found her crossing paths with Armand Leclerc, again the flamboyant agent who'd singled her out. He spotted her in a park where she was reading a book under a shady elm. He rushed over all apologies and wonder, repeating that he'd never encountered such a voice in all his career. "If you came on board, I could make you a star," he said, reminiscent of that night. She refused politely. He pressed, citing the potential fame and fortune. She stayed gentle but firm, telling him that stardom was no longer in her path, that she valued her peace more than an audience's fleeting praise. He stared in amazement, evidently baffled by a performer who'd give up the stage. Then he left, shaking his head as if she was the strangest phenomenon he'd ever witnessed. She resumed reading, unperturbed. In time, the memory of that gala night became a sort of urban legend. Remember the woman in cotton who sang Queen of the Night better than any star? People repeated the tale at dinner parties, half laughing at how they almost drove her away, half marveling at her incredible skill. Some claimed she was a lost aristocrat with a tragic backstory. Others insisted she was an angel. The truth remained simpler. She was just Ella Williams, a woman who once soared on grand stages but chose a quieter course. She discovered she could shape the city's music culture from behind the scenes, inspiring students, deterring snobbery, urging smaller venues to open up for talented novices. She spoke rarely, but when she did, people listened. That hush of respect replaced the hush of cruelty, a minor triumph for authenticity. As the years rolled on, Dan proposed to her in the simplest way over a quiet dinner at their favorite small restaurant. She accepted, tears in her eyes, remembering how he'd stood by her at the gala, helpless yet supportive. They had a modest wedding, no paparazzi, no dramatic solos from her. She sang only one gentle vow, a melody she composed for him alone. Life became more about shared day-to-day joys. They considered moving to a countryside town where they could build a life away from the city's vanity. But they delayed as her students needed her. She also felt a sense of mission in protecting the next generation from the illusions that nearly swallowed her. So they remained in the city in a slightly larger apartment with a second-hand upright piano in the corner. She practiced now and then, letting the notes fill that modest living room. Sometimes neighbors in the hallway paused, enthralled by the unexpected aria floating through the cheap drywall. She never complained if they listened. Music for her was meant to be shared spontaneously. At a certain point, a small arts publication wrote a lengthy retrospective on her, detailing her Berlin triumph, the disappearance, the gala shocker. They tried to find a new angle, concluding with a paragraph about how she continued to shape young talents. They compared her to a hidden diamond, referencing how a quiet soul can move mountains. She read the article once, then tucked it away in a drawer. She found no need to dwell on it. The best legacy, she believed, was intangible in the hearts of those who heard her and realized they too could defy scorn. She taught her students that wearing a cotton dress or old shoes never invalidated their artistry, that the stage belonged to whoever had courage, not a specific socioeconomic class. Some found her advice life-changing, others found her stance puzzling, all eventually recognized her sincerity. That was enough. Over a decade beyond that fateful gala, the city's memory of the event was half legend, half cautionary tale. People repeated it in smaller circles. Never laugh at the unassuming singer in your midst because she might dethrone your illusions with a single aria. They recounted how the hush that once accompanied sneers transformed into thunderous applause. Ella, for her part, rarely discussed it. She went on living, teaching, sometimes singing in small recitals for local charities that lacked glitz, but carried genuine gratitude. Her father's lessons guided her daily kindness over vanity, sincerity over show. And so, in the end, she never needed the diamond-strewn stage or the praise of thousands. She found fulfillment in every note she shared, in every child's voice she nurtured. The city that once smirked at her cotton dress now revered her memory as a quiet phenomenon that redefined greatness without fanfare. If you've ever been laughed at before you had the chance to speak, this story was written for you. Some voices don't need microphones. Some truths don't need permission. If Ella stayed with you like this story, share it with someone who knows exactly what it feels like to be underestimated.